looks like we're good to go.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, this is something that Kay has done to bring us together and to talk about some amazing subjects and topics. And so tonight's topic is prayer. And so, prayer is a really, really it's a powerful word. It's a powerful experience in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies, in our spiritual light body or soul. And so I wanted to really invite this particular collective that's joining us tonight to kind of talk about these different things. And that's why we're gathering. We're gathering to discuss the topic of prayer and to discuss what it means to us. And I hope that from this live transmission, whether you're watching live or on the replay, I hope that you are invited to consider your own definition of prayer. And maybe some of the things that we share tonight will change your perspective or maybe allow for you to align differently with this particular subject. So I'd like to start just by introducing the individuals that are on the call. And so I'm going to kind of pick you at random in the order that I'm seeing you. And so I'd love to welcome Kay Eck to our call tonight.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here because this is one of my favorite topics. And one of the reasons that I love it so much is because I feel like it's the world. There's so many different ways to approach it. And so I'm really excited to hear what everybody has to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you could just share a little bit about where you're located.
Well, I'm coming to you from San Miguel, Mexico. I got here a couple days ago, and I'm really thrilled that I could make it happen. So thanks.
So we have an international call on prayer tonight. So very exciting. Thank you so much. And Cerise, if you could share where you're located and what prayer means to you.
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. I'm Cerise Rizich. I am based in New Jersey. And what prayer means to me is, being in the moment, being present, being grateful, and being love. That's what prayer means to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I would love to hear from Joan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joan, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I feel like there are so many dimensions and aspects of prayer that I could speak to. Just as I was listening to Cerise, I was thinking about being a living prayer, or our life being a living prayer, or dancing your prayers, or some of the more dynamic aspects of prayer. So I'm really looking forward to diving in with everyone tonight.
Thank you so much, Joan. And Jillian.
Hello, I'm Jillian. I'm so honored to be with all of you all. I'm coming from Sedona, Arizona, and prayer for me is it really is connecting to the divine. I can quiet my mind, I can be present, I can be mindful, but unless I can physically feel a connection to the divine, that's when I know I'm in prayer. So that's what it means to me.
I love that, Jillian. Thank you. And Kay, I'd love to hear what prayer means to you. You might be on mute, though.
I'm so happy. Okay. So prayer to me means, I guess I would say, being in communion with all that is. And there's so many expressions of it. And throughout my life, I've had so many different evolving relationship with it. And it has been a dramatic range of experiences. So yeah, I would say just communion.
I love that. Thank you so much. I know for me, when I think about prayer, I really see it as such a powerful tool. I've seen it as such a powerful way of connecting to our hearts, our bodies, connecting to a higher self, you know, Christ or God or one source consciousness, whatever you call that. And I've seen miracles, I've seen manifestations, I've seen uh calm and surrender. It's like there's been such a wide spectrum really of my experience of prayer, and I've found it to be both inspiring and humbling in my own experience with really praying to the divine. I was actually thinking about one of the most impactful moments that I've had for myself with prayer. And I remember it was a moment of what I felt was righteous anger. I felt that I had a righteous anger that was just burning in my heart. And I remember praying and asking God, you know, I like the feminine of God. I remember asking Sophia, and I was just like, aren't you angry too? I'm so angry right now, and I know that I'm justified in this anger. Aren't you angry too? And I remember just feeling this very strong presence, and this strong feeling of compassion just wash over me. And, you know, the energy of God or my higher self really coming to me in this moment of deep anger, saying, no, I'm not, I'm not angry in the way that you're angry. It doesn't mean that you don't have the right to experience what you're feeling. Like you need to express that feeling and you need to release it. But I'm not angry at this experience, nor am I angry at the sort of cosmic drama that was playing out. It was such a feeling of love. And even though it took me time still to unpack some of the feelings that I had, it really just allowed for me to kind of see things from a very different perspective. And so for me, that is just one example of when prayer is done with consciousness, when it's done from a place of authenticity, the type of shifts that can kind of happen in your life. And so I kind of want to get into these conversations about prayer. And so I've gathered a few questions to kind of help us with that. And I'd love to start with Jillian. And so my question for you, Jillian, is how do you pray?
Yeah, it depends upon the moment, right? I if I'm intentional and trying to be at the same time every day, then it's always a matter of grounding, I think, is the first step for me. Just really grounding, and then breathing in until I can feel that connection, you know. And so that's the physical part of it. But how do I pray in general changes as my emotions or my thoughts or as the day goes. So I don't have a traditional structure per se.
Thank you. I love that you're bringing up tradition. It's something that I didn't really think about until you mentioned it. And I'm wondering if you're comfortable answering the question, do you think that prayer, in the way that you understand it, do you feel like it's connected to any religion or faith in the way that you practice personally?
Yeah. So as a young child, I asked my parents to take me to church. So I started attending church when I was in third grade. They would drop me off, you know. So and then all the way through. I remember a teacher in 7th grade calling me a Jesus freak. You know, I mean, and then in high school, I led during lunch breaks. I led prayer circles in a corner in the school, and then so it's been traditional Christian up until about 20 years ago. And then I was a religion major in college. And then I married a fellow religion major who went on, and he continues to be a pastor of a church. So I was a pastor's wife for over 20 years. And so all of that tradition, I'm finding myself actually going back to traditional services now, because I miss the hymns, and I miss the congregations and such. But there was a point in my life after 20 years of being a preacher's wife, that my theology or my theophacy or my experience of God was outgrowing the structure of traditional Christian theology. And but what's interesting is that all those years of being in a traditional Christian environment and practice, I don't think my prayer has changed, because it's always come from my heart. I didn't, the congregations we were a part of, we always did the Lord's Prayer on Sunday, but that was the only real structured prayer. So I don't think that it has changed much for me during that time. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I love the pearls of wisdom that you really shared within that. As someone who studied religion, studied all of these different ways that different collectives pray, I think there's a lot of impact in what you shared. And I'm curious, do you, in all of your study, in all of your personal experience, do you feel that there is a power in prayer?
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. Just the question alone touches me deeply. But then I have to go. I mean, there's so many times when, as a congregation, or praying with someone who's in a difficult moment. Yeah, prayer is so powerful. Even my son, he volunteered over in India for a number of years, and he was volunteering at a clinic where HIV people went to die, basically. And his job was to pray with all of those people. And the power that affected him and the people in the stories is just, there's no denying that there's power in prayer. And then if you want to take a mental or a metaphysical viewpoint on it, we talk about every word that we speak, whether we're intentional or not in it being a prayer or not. Each word holds power, each syllable holds power. So, and so when we are intentional with our words and our dialogue or monologue, then it's even more amplified.
I love that. I love that you're speaking to that. Thank you so much, Jillian. And I'd love to bring Kay into the conversation. So Kay, how do you pray?
I hope this isn't too long of a story. Like I said, there's been such a huge evolution, and I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I went to a Catholic school, and prayer was a part of every single day. My personal relationship with prayer started out as, was like tinged with that Catholic guilt. Unfortunately, I didn't feel that I was worthy enough to ask for anything. So my prayers focused on gratitude and apologies, basically. And what I find so interesting is that I I these days I also don't pray for God to bring me anything, because I know that I'm 100% responsible for my life, and that God has given me the power of creating my life. And so my prayers are still mostly focused on gratitude. And also in some ways apology and forgiveness, but that's not the primary element of it. But what's interesting to me is that I used to, I grew up with these set prayers, and there wasn't like a lot of room for freelancing in those. And then, I kind of came into more of like some of us have shared, a little broader understanding of what the divine is. And so I started having my own dialogue and creating my own prayers. But what I have found recently, so two things have happened. One is there was this very specific moment where I noticed that I had been praying to, I'm going to back up, because I had been praying to God that was like up there. And then almost like suddenly one day, I realized that God was actually within me, and my vision and prayer turned to the God within me. So that was the first significant thing that happened. And lately, what I have found is that words no longer resonate for me. And I am in like a mind meld with the divine. And when I start out, I think like, oh, I typically pray either all day long, but mostly in the evening and in the morning. And I'll start to go into that old habit of prayer, and then suddenly like I can't even do it, as I just like let myself be enveloped in divinity. And it's been such an interesting place, because I feel like I have no needs, I have no wants, I have just existing within that divinity. And so I'm really still exploring how within that type of relationship, how to have a really intimate communion with God, with Mother, Father, God. And so that's kind of like the broad overview of how I pray now. So
I love it. And it reminds me of something that Joan had mentioned earlier, of this idea of a living prayer, of like when your beingness is really in that sacred communion with prayer. And gosh, I love the way that you connected that understanding. I think many of us on the planet have kind of attuned to this God outside of ourselves. And I think many of us, myself included, are in that process of really understanding that if we are daughters and sons of the Most High, so to speak, that consciousness exists within us, that blueprint lives within us. And I feel that also beautifully threads into what Jillian was saying. There's where she feels it in her heart, when she's praying. And I feel like what you're accessing is really connecting all of these in a really beautiful way. And I think the one other thing that I want to add is that you kind of mentioned sort of this mindfulness that is present in the way that you're connecting in prayer, that it doesn't even require words. And I was wondering if you could speak more to that. Does prayer relate to mindfulness or meditation, or some of the other practices that kind of exist on the planet?
I think that those tools that bring you into awareness, give you access to the consciousness, shifts your consciousness closer to the Christ consciousness that is God. And so I feel like if I hadn't learned to meditate, I would have taken a very different track, because that allows the mind to step back and the consciousness to fill that space. So it's that meditation's been critical for me. I don't know that there are any other tools that I could think of, except maybe like contemplation and reflection, questioning, all of those things I consider tools, but really meditation would be the primary one. And then
Yeah.
just also like remembering, like it's so easy to fall back into your everyday life and forget that this is God's creation, and that you are a pivotal part of it. And as far as your life goes, you're the most important part of it. And so, but I think that's okay, because we have been given the human experience for a reason. And to be fully in the human experience, sometimes you do forget. And I think that's really okay. And, you know, we have this relationship that ebbs and flows with God until we're completely in the Christ consciousness, like we're going to ebb and flow like that.
I love that you're sharing that. And one of the things that um, really struck my heart to share when you were speaking is that there's in something you shared, there is this gentle process of moving into the kind of prayer that you're talking about that doesn't even require words. It's like, similar to what Jillian was sharing. It's like, some of these prayers that we were shown when we were younger, or maybe in a particular religious practice, there's a comfort, and then you kind of get to start going off script. And so even those types of prayers are a tool, like you mentioned meditation. I think some of those kind of recorded prayers are also, it's a rhythm, it's a pattern. I know some people go through a physical movement practice of prayer, whether it's bowing or moving on a mat and facing a particular direction. Prayer is seen in that way, and that physical practice also has, and I'm curious, I didn't prepare you for this question, but I am curious about how you feel about some of the rigidity, actually, since we are talking about sort of, I don't want to call it scripted prayer, but prayers that have been created, or like a rigidity within particular patterns that are connected to prayer. Do you think it's good to occasionally break out of that to ensure that it's not just like rote kind of muscle memory? Or do you think that those types of practices that are in a consistent rhythm serve in some way?
Well, I've really actually had quite a journey with this, because since I have studied yoga, and like we were thinking about chanting and mantra, and and I started realizing that, first of all, there's some really beautiful prayers out there, but I kind of feel like God wants to hear from me, like she, it doesn't, why am I repeating someone else's words? I don't know, I didn't write them. And so, now I feel like it's more important for me to express myself, but that's not, I feel like it's so individual, and what people feel connects them to the divine is what's most important, even if it's just a gateway. And like I stopped chanting mantra, because I realized I don't even know what they're saying. Like, why would I just be repeating these words that I don't know what they're saying. And I also want to add, and I'm not sure this is particularly related to this specific question, but I used to ask for prayers for other people, like, please bless such and such, please heal this person, please bring strength. And now I feel that I'm not even sure what the point of that is anymore, because they have chosen this path. And sometimes these things that they're experiencing are the doorway to their greatest revelation. So why would I want to take that experience from them? So I have like, like, this is what I'm saying, like my whole relationship to prayer has just like gone out the window, and it's all topsy-turvy, and I don't know what the heck's going on, but that's what I'm just finding my way through.
I love it. Well, I hope this conversation helps you in that process for sure. And I really love what you shared. And there was a question that I had for you, you know, for individuals that are using that what you defined as a gateway, using mantra, using prayers that we're familiar with. Do you feel like there's something that, because I personally feel like those repetitions have a service as well, in connection to mindfulness and in connection to a particular aspect of meditation. But I do think that there is a difference between going through a kind of a ceremonial sacred process with a pattern or a rhythm that you're familiar with, and doing something out of rote memory where there isn't a consciousness behind it. And so I'm curious, because it seems that you've really stepped into mastery in that place. I'm just curious, is there something that you feel might be a helpful tool for someone who is using mantra or is using a particular pattern or rhythm, that they could maybe ask themselves in the moment to bring them back into the sacred within whatever rhythm they're choosing?
I mean, I don't know if I would even dare to come between a person and their prayer. So I would say no, I don't have anything for that.
Okay. Well, good to know. Jillian, I'm going to have you ponder that for a second, but I do want to hear from Joan. So Joan, I'm curious, we've heard a couple of different ways in regards to how we pray. How do you pray? You might be muted.
Yes, I am. I too pray in a variety of ways, and I would actually like to just speak to what you and Kay were just discussing, because just today I was driving in my car and I was saying just a one word mantra, like for my 10-minute drive from my house to the gym. And the experience of doing that for me was like a portal into another dimension of communion with the divine, to the extent that I was able to like really be taking in the divine all around me, as I'm driving down the road, as I'm seeing the trees go by. And so that's one form of prayer that I do. I do still ascribe to the blessing of others. I know, Kay, that's not where you're at these days, but for example, if I hear like a siren going down the road or something, I just ask that some grace be sent to, whether it's the first responders or certainly the people that are in need. When I'm in a particularly connected place, enjoy singing my prayers. I have a certain kind of rhythm or routine around my prayer in the morning, which definitely helps get me plugged in. But when I'm having a particularly joyful day, I will sing my prayers. And I think I'll just pause with that.
love that so much. I love that you sing your prayers, and I love everything that you shared in regards to your perspective and your personal experience with prayer. I think it's these are really good things to kind of consider in all of the different ways that we experience prayer. So thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
And I'm curious, do you feel does prayer affect the choices that you make in your life? And if so, how?
Hmm, that is such a powerful question. I would say prayer inspires choices that I make. Prayer illuminates opportunities or possibilities that I might not have recognized if I were not plugged in the way that I ascribe to or do my best to do. And, you know, part of my prayer typically is to really be in alignment or to to consecrate my will to divine will. And so it does soften some of my, I don't know if it choices is the right word, but it softens my the way I move forward through life, we'll say.
I I love that. I love that. That's been my personal experience as well. I love that you kind of are mentioning the softening. That's like a really, really beautiful perspective. Now I have a kind of spicy subject and I might pull in some other individuals to talk about it. So, some of the things that that you hear is this topic of quote unquote unanswered prayers. And I'm curious what your perspective is. What if a prayer is unanswered? And what do you do with that?
Well, I'm at a state in my journey where I know the divine, great mother, great father of all life um, welcomes and honors my feelings. So usually an unanswered prayer is some version of uh, not coinciding with either what I expected or what I would perceive as the optimal way that something might unfold or develop. And I have certainly come to learn through my many years of living and life experience that often what we receive is far surpasses what we expected, and the timing might be different. So typically what I would do is have my feelings about it, share my feelings about it, sometimes with God, and then wait and see what unfolds.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And I think it's super interesting that you talked about perception and expectation in connection to prayer. And I think that those are really interesting words when we're talking about unanswered prayers.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, Kay, Jillian, and Cerise, I have questions for you too, but does anyone want to elaborate on this concept of unanswered prayers? Kay?
I think this goes along with what I was saying about people's souls, their highest selves, or the oversoul, or whatever you want to call it, being in the driver's seat of each person's experience. And so if the prayer is unanswered, it's because there's something to learn, there's something better down the road. This particular thing has great value to them, that they signed up for this because XYZ that they can't quite see yet. And so yeah, like for my own personal experience, I no longer ask for things. I take a different approach. I take a more, I guess you could say, ownership of it, that it's up to me to create these things. So I'm kind of moving. I still pray. I still feel like My life is a prayer. I have many times devoted a yoga practice to prayer, but I'm moving into this area where I'm more decreeing things to be true for myself and the world, and so it feels like a completely different energy. So
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that perspective. It kind of makes me think of what I started this conversation with. You know, I had a very powerful experience with prayer where I was like, "Aren't you as angry as I am?" And it was like, "No." Um, and it wasn't that it was an unanswered prayer. It was that I didn't like the answer. And the truth of the matter is that the anger that I was feeling was really towards a reconciliation that I needed within my own heart about, you know, last time we gathered, we talked about empowerment. And so for me, there was a moment where I just gave my power away to something outside of myself. And so the answer that I got was really for me to kind of come into intimate contact with that resonance so that way it could be transmuted and healed and and alchemized into something different, which was compassion, the feeling that I felt once the answer was no. So really, really interesting conversation. Thank you so much. So Cerise, I'd love to bring you in because it's been a moment. And as I've introduced everyone, I'd love to know, how do you pray?
Sure. Well, I remember Jillian's comment about grounding. And so every morning I work out and I'm conscious of the fact that my mind's racing. I'm thinking about the day. And so during that workout, I'm focused on grounding. I'm, thinking through things as I'm doing my lunges and squats and, on the treadmill, I'm releasing that and I'm getting to that space. And then similar to Joan mentioning, mornings, after working out, you know, uh, I take a shower every day, and that's my time. That's my time to contemplate. That's my time to pray. That's my time to, be in that present moment, and water is also so powerful and healing as well. So as I'm in the shower, I am also focused on, being in that present moment, thinking about what I'm grateful for, and trying to start my day, being heart-centered.
I love what you're sharing because it was one of the questions that I had for you actually was, does prayer require sacred space?
So, yeah, I don't think it requires sacred space. I think that you can pray anywhere. Um, I also know that a lot of people do feel the need to have an altar or have the elements. And I have always, for at least the last 20 years, have always thought about the body having all the elements in it, right? So, when you just think about, water and, your saliva. So, and when you think about air and you think about your lungs and breathing and your breath, and you think about, fire and your fire of spirit, your intelligence, the sparkle in your eye, when you think about the earth and you think about your bones and, the parts of your body that are dense, your teeth. So when you think about all of that, your body has all of the elements. And so, you are an altar. You can pray anywhere you are. But I have found that for me personally, you know, using some tools like incense, um, like having, passing by an altar or, using some music can help with my prayer as well. The other thing too is I find that, decluttering space helps me be in that moment and in that space. So I do think the intent, is important, as you're praying too. So while I do think that, you can pray anywhere and you don't have, you don't need to have sacred space. I do also think that, some people having that tool, using some tools can help.
I love that you're mentioning that, because even when you shared your experience of prayer, you talked about, like, my mind is thinking about the to-dos and all of the things, and then I move my body and I become clear, and then I'm able to like create that sacred space with the water when I'm, and so I feel like you're really embodying what you're sharing of your experience of prayer. And another question that I had for you is, what has been, and I might actually ask Jillian and Joan this as well. What do you feel is the difference between praying alone and praying in community?
Did you want me to start, or did you want
Yes.
to? Okay.
Yes, and then I'll go to Jillian, and then I'll go to Joan.
I mean, I think prayer is good in any and all situations. Um, I do though believe that, prayer can be amplified, in community. I've personally seen it, felt it, experienced it. So, but again, that doesn't mean, if you're alone, you shouldn't pray.
Thank you. Jillian, what's been your experience between praying alone and praying in community?
Yeah, so praying in community, I found that there's kind of two different ways that that happens. One is when people come together with a singular intent and pray for that with that singular intention. And another is like on Sunday mornings in traditional church, where somebody says, let us pray. And we're all listening in with our ears and our hearts, but we don't know what's coming. And so, do we really, are we all in? Because we don't know if we agree with what's about to be said or not. Right? So, yeah, I much prefer the ones in community where we all know and are in agreement as to what our intention for the prayer is. And I go back to Cherise, it's amplification for me, when two or more are gathered, it's exponential.
Thank you. Joan?
Well, what I consider with the individual prayer is there are times when it just feels so intimate, and I don't even really have words for that, but there's a quality of that is a treasure, feels like such a treasure. And the group prayer that comes to mind for me is really the kind of prayer I think about when I have either like been in a group or working with a group where we do an opening prayer, for example, and we're co-creating a prayer, which I love that, and I've experienced the amplification or the kind of that singular energy. It feels like more of the fire hose as opposed to what Jillian was describing of when there's like that, we're all praying together with the same intention, but the dynamic co-creative prayer, to me, again, I keep going back to like the joyfulness or the dynamic seems to be what wants to come through me today, of interweaving and like how we go deeper, how we go bigger together.
Yeah, I love the perspectives that you are bringing in regards to this collective prayer and the different ways that collective prayer presents itself. The unknown that Jillian is talking about is like, do I even agree? I'm not sure what you're going to say. And I love that the discernment is really present for you, Jillian. And I love what you're sharing as well, Joan. I feel a trust in the collective that is gathering in this weaving of a tapestry, whether perfect or perfectly imperfect, so to speak, that it's weaving together in this really beautiful way. And Kay, I wanted to ask you, what has been your experience with individual prayer and collective with the different perspectives that have been brought here?
Yeah, I mean, even though, I've said what I said, I'm also like, I love a church service.
Fair, yes.
And I was just visiting the cathedral in San Miguel, and it's so beautiful. And you didn't ask me about sacred spaces, but I also love sacred spaces. Like these beautiful cathedrals and churches, and that just show magnificent human accomplishment in honor of the highest power. And I love all that. And I also think that, so I think that, like Joan and Jillian have said, like the intention behind the group prayer is so powerful. And just joining hearts and joining voices has a potent effect. I've also read recently that the most powerful word in terms of frequency is just the word God. And so I think that people gather together with just saying that word, and or even having the thought is incredibly powerful. And I had this one experience where I was in severe pain for an extended period of time, and all I could do was just repeat the word God over and over and over and over again. And it really was the only thing that got me through, because I was feeling overcome with the pain. And so that is becoming more often the chant, I guess you could say, that I use is just saying the word and expressing my love, my appreciation.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate 2 points that you brought up in what you shared, this idea of the repetition and release that can exist within prayer, but also what you mentioned in regards to sacred sites. And now this is a very interesting topic that I'd actually like to get into just a little bit for anyone who's willing to share their experience. I've had those experiences of going to sacred spaces and just being struck, not just by the beauty of the space and the intention that was put into it, regardless of all circumstances. You can feel when you're really in a place that is sacred. But it's happened twice in my short life here on the planet, where I actually was in communion with a statue that I could feel was breathing. The statue was so full of prayer that it was breathing. One is a Buddha that's here in Sedona, which is where I'm located. It's at the stupa, and it's this Buddha. And when you sit in front of this wooden statue, you can feel it breathing. And the second was this Mother Mary statue that was in Long Beach, California. That originally it was at a Catholic monastery, and then it became a Buddhist monastery. And they agreed to keep this Mother Mary statue because it not only did it honor the avatar of Mother Mary, but it honored the avatar of Kuan Yin. And so it was a kind of two seemingly very opposing religions coming into communion and saying yes to allowing for this statue to remain. And when you were in the presence of this particular statue, you could experience it breathing. That's a very interesting phenomenon. I'm just curious if anyone has had a similar experience, whether with sound or an experience of a statue. I'm just curious if anyone has any experiences like that. Okay.
Ashley, I think you'll be able to relate to this one, but when I was in Paris a couple of years ago, I think that you recommended the Cathedral of Mary Magdalene in the center in Paris in the, I don't remember what district it was in, but I've never felt such, I don't even know what the word is, but because it was so expansive and so comforting in that cathedral. And while I was there was a film crew filming, I think they were Portuguese, and they were filming this period drama, and there were actors and cameras and lights, and it could have been very distracting, but it was the overall essence of that place. And I think that also that it wasn't technically a cathedral because it was formerly a building under Napoleon or something that they converted to a church. And it was just, I've gotten that presence in many churches that I've been to. And that's why I keep visiting them, is because there's something there, there is something, the spirit lives.
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that particular it is a church, and you're correct. It was a political building that was then converted, and then they were like, yes, let's put Mary Magdalene here. And so I think there's a lot of interesting connection with that particular story. But when you see this building, it just looks like a regular historical building. Like, you wouldn't think anything is there. And then as soon as you walk through these beautiful doors, you're just struck by this amazing, amazing representation of Mary Magdalene with angels all around her in every which way. And it's a very, very impactful place. And I think that's why I wanted to mention the two statues that I experienced, because these were not in churches. They were both outside in nature, seemingly quote unquote mundane, and yet the impact was really present there. And so if it's not a sacred space like a church or a cathedral, or a particular statue, I'm curious, Cerise, you mentioned elementals. I'm curious if you found sacred spaces in nature, and if you have an example.
I absolutely do. And in fact, Joan was with me. We were in the south of France, and we went to go visit Mary Magdalene's cave. But we decided, we were with a few other people as well, and we decided it just didn't feel right starting at the cave, and we actually wanted to go pray. And so we went off the course a bit and found a very powerful site to set up and pray at. And it was in nature. We were outside, we were in the elements, but even just putting your hand against, the rocks that were there, you could feel this intense amount of energy and power coming from them. And we had a very moving experience, in my opinion, there in that beautiful sacred space that we know years ago, Mary Magdalene, spent time there and living there. So it was quite magical and beautiful.
Thank you so much. Okay.
I'm so sorry to interrupt your flow here, but I wanted to add that when I was doing a trek in Japan, we followed this Buddhist Shinto trail, and there was a cypress tree that was a Shinto shrine, and they had it decorated with rope that was like woven this big around. This tree was massive. You couldn't even really see the whole thing being by it. But when I approached that tree, I swear to you, I have never felt so much love in my life. I could hardly leave the site because this tree was so magical. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I'm so glad. I think there are so many magical stories that we have, and it's interesting the power of this particular heartwave connection between the five of us, because every time you mention something, my heart is pinging another experience of being in sacred communion and prayer, or having a particular moment. I have to mention, if anyone has ever been to the Self-Realization Center, it's in Malibu. It's dedicated to Yogananda, and they have this museum. And it's, you're learning the history of his life, and it's lovely to learn everything that he has experienced in his life here on the planet. But I had a shocking moment where I was kind of in communion and prayer in my own heart, and I was looking at his robe, which is pinned in a particular way in this glass container, so you can't touch it. But as soon as I stood in front of this, his outfit, like I could feel him. I could feel him hugging me. I could feel it, because there was so much that he had done in this particular robe and the way that he supported the planet, that I could feel that almost transmission still present. And so I love that we're talking about these sacred tools, some of the things that we were talking about before in connection to prayer and the impact that it has. And that's an interesting thing to think about when we're talking about prayer, is that we leave an energy, an imprint, when we do use these tools or we do say these things out loud, that physical things that are in form are also affected by this intention that we have, which comes back to what each of you has shared, Kay, in connection to the resonance of understanding, like your higher self, God consciousness that's within your own heart. It's leaving that impact. And Jillian, you sharing about this powerful repetition of prayer and being in communion, and following like a particular pattern. And Cerise, you bringing up the elementals that exist, and Joan, this living prayer, the dynamic energies that kind of exist. And so I kind of want to wrap up our conversation here in regards to prayer. And, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I know that my perspective and my experience of prayer is going to change from this conversation. And I'm hoping others that are listening to this, whether live or on the replay, also have something to consider as they discern what prayer means to them. Just like we have our own experiences, so do the individuals that are listening. And so I wanted to kind of complete our call with a prayer that some of us know, which is the Serenity Prayer. And so I invite you, whether live or on the replay and here in this collective moment, for us to just kind of take a breath and feel our bodies, and just allow for these words to wash over you as we complete our call tonight. And so, God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you so much for joining us. And Kay, is there an announcement perhaps when our next gathering will be?
I don't think we've set a date, have we?
I know it'll be sometime in March, so
It'll be in March around this time.
perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you next time.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Valentine's Day.
Bye.